Hello everyone, welcome back to our Python Fundamentals series. This is lesson 4, whereby we're going to be taking a closer look at functions and also file handling. So we've already looked briefly at what a function is. So remember that a function is a reusable block of code. We have, for example, this example here, which is a greet function. And so the thing to understand is that we can have built-in functions, but we also have the ability to create our own, indicated by, we've defined a function, we've called it greet, and this is the format for a function here. We've got colons, and every time we call the greet function, we want to print this word hello. So a function is like a recipe. Once it's written, you can use it again and again. It helps break big problems into smaller and manageable pieces. So how do you define a function? We define a function, set a function by using the def keyword in order to define a function. So we want to define a function called say hello, and this is what we want that function to do. So every time we call this function say hello, it's going to spit out hello world. Of course, we name our function, give your function a descriptive name. It's best to give descriptive names so that we know exactly, just by looking at it, we know, okay, this function says hello. And then you write the code inside the function. Whenever you call the function, it runs whatever is inside. So this is what will run. Okay. Calling a function. So first we define the function. So you first create your reusable block of code. You then call the function, run the function by using its name and the parentheses, like so, say hello, execute the code. Python jumps to the function and then executes it. Oops. Okay, function with parameters. So you can pass data into your functions. The function uses the parameters. It makes functions adaptable to different inputs. So for example, we've defined our function, we want to greet, and then we want to greet a person's name. So we can have, for example, a variable called name. Let's say we had it name equals Alice. So then now when we call this function and say define greet name, and what we want it to do is we want it to print hello and then the name variable. So once we then call this function and we pass the name variable, it will then say hello Alice. Return values. So we can also have an input in our function. So a function can also receive parameters, as we have looked at. The function will then perform the operations. The function will then send back a result, and we can store or use the result in our code. So here's an example. So define add. We're creating a function called add. We want to add A and B, and so what we want this function to do is to return A plus B. So if you had A as 3, B is 4, when we then return the function, when we call this function, it will then return 7, depending on what A and B is, or whatever we pass as A and B. So if we had 6 and 9, and we called that function, then we called the add function, then it would return 15, as an example. Default parameters. Give a parameter a default value. If no input is provided, the function will use the default instead, and it makes parameters optional while ensuring that the function still works. So we can provide a default value indicated by in the brackets here. So we defined our greet function, we've given it a name which is called friend, and so when we print hello name, it will default to friend. If there's no name provided as a separate variable, it will just default to hello friend. But if we've defined that the variable name is Alice, then it will say hello Alice. Okay, next we have keyword arguments versus a standard call. So at a glance, these two look very similar, but as we can see, so we've got the intro function and we've got Bob and 25. But with the keyword argument, we have again the intro function, but we have explicitly stated age equals 25, name equals Bob. So what's the difference? In a standard call, the order matters, as we are expecting this format of first the name and then the age. Whereas in a keyword argument, it doesn't matter necessarily which way we put the age and name, whether we put name first or age second, as we have already explicitly stated age is equal to 25, name equals Bob. So we look at this example here where we've defined intro is going to be equal to name and age, and so we're going to print name and age. So it's going to be expecting the same format of the name goes first and the age goes second. Whereas in intro, it doesn't matter, as we've explicitly said name and age, and we've already passed the values explicitly in. Okay. File handling, reading files. In order to open a file, we use the open function to access the files, or open method. Read the content, we use the read function, the read method, sorry. To close a file, we closing the file releases system resources. So it will look something like this. File equals open brackets. We're opening this file called data text, and we're going to read the file indicated by R. And so if we print file dot read, then that's going to allow for us to open the file and read. Wait, what? My goodness. So with keyword arguments, you can specify which value goes where. This improves readability and avoids confusion with parameter order. File handling. So of course we can do three things. We can open the file, we can read the content of the file, and we must remember to close the file. So we open the file with the open brackets, the open method. We read the content using the read method, and we close the file using dot close method. And that will look something like this. So we've got a variable called file, and that we set that as equal to, we call the open function, open brackets, and then we have this variable here, which is data.text. So this will be referencing some text file within our script, our program. And then in order to read the file, we indicate, that's indicated by R in quotations, and we close that. So now if we actually want to read it, we still need to call the read method. So yeah, let's start that again. Let's start that one again. File handling. So there's three different things that we can do when using reading the files. File handling. So we're going to be looking at, okay, my goodness. Next up we have file handling. So there are three different things that we can do. We can open the file using the open function. We can read the contents of that file using the .read method, and we must also remember to close the file using the .close method. And so that's indicated by something like this. So we have a little example here. We have the file variable. We set that as equal to the open function here, and within the function we have this piece of information here. So you've got data.text. So this will correspond to an actual file within our program, which we are calling or referencing. And then we have R, which indicates that we want to read to this file. So then we're going to say print, call the print function, and then we're going to call file, this file variable here, and which contains within it the data.text file, and the ability to read it. And so we're going to just say file dot read and call the read method, and that is going to enable us to read the contents of that file. And we just need to remember that when we're done, to close the file. So we're going to say file dot close. So Python lets you read from text files using the open function, and use R mode to read, and don't forget to close the file when you're done. But we can also write to files, so we do that in a very similar way, where we have this file variable, you call the open function. So now we're opening a text file known as output.txt, but this time we want to write to the file, so that's indicated by this W here as opposed to the R for read. And so it's essentially the same as before, but now instead of file.read we're using file.write method, and we want to update this in the file saying hello file, and just remember again to close the file when it's done. So you can write to a file with W or overwrite, or you can also append a file using A, so this would be A in that case, to append the file. And we use the write method in order to add content, and again just remember to close the file after we're done. So if you want to append, this is to add something to the existing file, keeping the contents within it. But if we use write, then we're overriding whatever is in that file. So now when we read the file, all we're going to see is hello file. Reading line by line. So with a statement, we have automatic file handling. For loop, we iterate through each line, and processing each line, we work with individual lines. So what does all this mean? So with open, we have data.text, and we have read as F for line in F. What is this all about? The file line by line using handles. What's all this about? So we have now the with method. Right, we can also write to files using what is known as the with method. So is formatted like this. So we use the with keyword as opposed to starting with a variable, and then this is all the same. Open new file.txt, so we want to write to this file, but now we use these two new keywords as F. So we're saying F will be essentially likened to the variable, which we're now going to iterate over. And so we say f.write Python is great. So now we're writing to this file. So the benefit of using the with method is that it's much more clean and safer, and it's a better practice of writing or updating or working with files in Python, and that it also automatically closes the file. So it's a much more simpler format. But we're going to also look at some practical examples as well. So here's a summary of different file modes. So we can read to a file, write to a file, append or update a file, and we can also read and write to a file simultaneously using R+. Okay, so we're in Google Colabs once again, and so remember, these are the different modes of what we can do to a file. So we can read a file, we can write to a file, and bear in mind that this will overwrite what we have existently or previously written in the file. We can append to a file, and we can read and write both simultaneously using the R+ command. So let's do some practical examples of how we can demonstrate these. So we're going to once again add a new code block, and we're going to demonstrate how to manually write to a file, meaning that you need to always add this line at the end, otherwise the system or the file will stay open, which can generate errors within your program, which of course you don't want. So let's just explain what's going on here. So we've got a variable called file, or this file instance keyword. We've set it to open using the open function, and we've created a document known as output.text. So this could also be output.pdf, etc., etc. Next, we are indicating with the W that we want to write to this file, and on the next line we have begun writing to the file by using the write function. Okay, so using the write method rather, file.write, and we're going to be adding in hello world. On our next line we are also writing this line here. This is line 2. Now you might be wondering, what is this \n all about? This just simply means new line, to ensure that hello world and this is line 2 are on 2 separate lines. And of course we need to again add in this line to close the file manually. Right, so if you run this code, we should see hello world, and we should also see this is line 2 on a separate line. Oops. Okay, and now, so as we run this code, you can see that nothing has actually happened here. Well, if we take a look at our file section over here, we can see that output.text has been generated, right? And so why can't we not see the output? If we used to open this file, for example, we can see the output over here. Hello world, this is line 2. But let's say we want to see the contents of this file. Let's just close this quickly. Close this also. Close tab. Perfect. So let's say we want to see the contents of this file within the what we call as the terminal, as we were seeing before. So what we need to do is then use the read function. So if you say file equals, there we go, it's auto generated for us there. So open output.text read, and so now we want to print file.read so that we can read the context of output.txt. Once again, remembering to manually close the file. So if we run this command now, we can see within the terminal, hello world, this is line 2. If we were to remove the new line, we can see everything will be generated on one line. Perfect. But of course, this is not the best way that we should be writing our code. We want to and then instead use the with method. So let's once again create a new code block, and I've included an example of writing a piece of code or opening a file with the with method. So what's happening here? We are opening the file, reading the file, and reading its content, and then printing the file is now safely closed. And if we run this, we should get an error, and I'll explain why in a second. File not found error. So you might be wondering, why is the file not found? It's because we have not actually written to the file. So it's trying to read a file that doesn't exist. Okay, so let's go ahead and actually include an example where we've written to a file. So now we are still using the with method, and we've labeled our file as diary.txt using the open function. We're going to be writing to the file, and we have also this as keyword, and we're saying as file. So the as keyword simply just means that when we want to reference this file, that we want to store everything in this variable called file. Okay, so we're now going to be referencing file.write. Let's do that again. Right, so now we're using the with method. So we write it like so: with open function, we've called it diary.txt, signified we're going to be writing to this file. And we also have this as keyword. The as keyword simply stores the variable, or is, no, how do I explain this? Where's my phone? Right, so now we have another example where we have again the with method, the open function, and we're calling the file diary.txt, signifying again that we're going to be writing to this file. And we also have this as keyword, and we said as file. So what does the as keyword mean? So the as keyword, this is a keyword that is primarily used for creating an alias or creating an alternative name for something that, oh my days, I don't know. Okay. Okay, so now we're going to be using. How do I start? I'm not gonna. Yes, you are. You're great. Okay, so now we are using the. Right. Okay, so let's add in this example here. Okay, so we're going to be once again using the with method. We've got again the open function. We're labeling this file as diary.txt, signifying by W that we're going to be writing to the file, and we also have this as keyword. The as keyword is primarily simply just used for aliasing or creating an alternative name for something. So instead, let's say we want to just call this f. So now we can just simply, instead of saying file.write, we can do f.write. But just bear in mind, we will need to change the other instances as well. So we just say as f, and we go f.write for each of these instances, like so. And so we could simply say f.read. So simply just a way to speed up your coding. Or if you had, say for example, a conflicting name, then you could use the as keyword in that way. Alright, so let's have a look at the rest of the code. So firstly, we're writing to this file and we're writing day 1 started learning with Python, and then we signified we want a new line. For our second line, we're again using the with function and as f, so we're going to write f.write. We're writing our second line, but however, notice that we're, instead of using the write mode, we're now in append. So instead of overwriting this line, we are now going to be adding day 2, learn about file handling, day 3, mastered the with statement. And of course, to read anything back, we don't need to again include the .close or the close function method, but we simply say the same with open diary text read, and we signified that we're going to be using the f as opposed to file, abbreviating again, and we want to print my Python diary on the screen, and then under my Python diary we want to read the contents of this file. So what we should see on screen is my Python diary followed by day 1, day 2 and day 3 entries. Let's run this code. As you can see, my Python diary, day 1, day 2, day 3. And if you come over on the left here, we've got files, and we can see that this file has now been created, diary.txt. Once again, we can, of course, open up the file and preview it like so. Let's go ahead and close both of these. Perfect.